the result of the recent election will sure make us work together. The social services, as we have an increasingly ageing population in the borough, they will have to perform. We will have to decide what we can do, and we will have to do it better. And there is a finite amount of funding which is available, and that will have to be spent in the right way to make sure that we do succeed in supporting those who need assistance from the taxpayer. But I believe, I'm an optimist, I believe we will come through this next cycle in a happy state.
I've been told not to answer that, so I'm sitting here quietly.
Good, because it's Alison's turn to reply, and then we'll move on to our other panelists.
Well, let's see if I can manage to do it without the mic as well, because actually the humming is always difficult. Look, I think we've got a huge challenge ahead of us, because we've got a rising levels of need, and at a time when actually government and council budgets are reducing. But I think we're right. It is a borough that we all love to live in. We've come here because we want to be part of Barnet. I think the big issue for me is how we, as politicians, collectively hold the ring so that those lovely things about Barnet, good schools, green spaces, and the environment we share and enjoy, actually is there for everyone. And so we hold the ring collectively to make sure that the whole community benefits from Barnet. And that's really important, because actually at a time when resources are tight, there are tough choices to be made, and they need to be made with a set of principles about equity, access, and those are really important things to me, and I'm sure to many other councillors. One of the things I would say, particularly in relation to older people, I think we've got to be forward-thinking. One of the things that we were looking at during our manifesto period, and will continue to do, is looking at, for example, Unison's ethical care charter, and resisting the race to quality in terms of care costs. Of course, there's potential for all of us financially in that way, but also looking at things like the expert input from groups like Age UK, and it was purely accidental actually to have an age concerned pen, and things like the Alzheimer's Society Dementia Manifesto for London, because we have a growing level of need around dementia, we have an ageing population, and we will need collectively to own that challenge of making sure that everyone lives the best and most dignified life that they can live. And finally, actually, I think it's up to all of us, but particularly those as politicians, to look at creative new models and actually embrace new suggestions and new challenges. So, for example, it won't be the solution for everyone, but the Women's Co-Housing Project up in High Barnet is one way in which a set of women who felt that they might be on their own at the end of their lives came together and looked forward and thought that that would be a way to structure their later lives. Not everyone has the resources or the power to do that, but actually we need to look at ways in which we can work together and work for everyone being able to live in dignity as they go older, because many are becoming older without close family or without family close, and therefore we've got a collective responsibility. No easy choices. I asked a Labour politician 4 years ago about some of the challenges around adult social care and health, and she said, yeah, that's the thing that keeps most of us awake at night, and actually that is true, because they are the big challenges for the future.
I was actually at the conference this morning.
Not yet, Karen.
Yeah.
Thank you. John, can I ask you to say, and remember the question is, does party politics affect this? So we want to really have a view of that.
No, I don't think so very much. I mean, parties will emphasise certain aspects and then snap the other side for not doing so. I'm part of the problem. I'm already old, so I recognise this. Now, I think I'll be corrected by the leader on this. I think the largest slice of the budget of the London Borough Fund, in fact, is adult social services. So it's not as though we skim, right? With the money we've got, we do what we can. I'm not speaking of Conservative administration, but the same with Labour. They would simply be able to emphasise something more than others. There wouldn't be more money. There just wouldn't be, because the strict circumstances are such. The suggestion by Councillor Moore just now about, I didn't know about these women getting together and doing their own thing. That's going to be a lot more, I think, the future. If you think back, people are historically minded. Old people didn't last that long in the past, but those that did were looked after. The churches beneficent association, I'm talking about the 16th, 17th, 18th centuries. There were hospitals of one kind or another. A hospital was a place where you went to stay. It wasn't an infirmary, as became the word has changed meanings. So we're really in a different, less spiritual age, with a lot more older people. We care for them. I hope I'll be cared for one of these days by somebody. I've got nobody else to look after me. I don't think it's a political question, really. It can be bandied around by politicians, but it simply is there. It's a fact.
Okay, I'd like to get this done first. It's not just the old we're talking about. The question did include the homeless, the physically or mentally challenged, as well as children. So Aubrey, do you want to?
Well, thank you very much. I must declare a non-interest, beginning with this. I'm not a member of any political party, and I have been a member of all three parties in my time. And I've
There's
seen
more than 3.
4 parties. And I am delighted to hear the common approach of the leaders of the 2 major parties who recognise the problems. Barnet is a marvellous place to be in. I'm told there are 340,000 people in Barnet, which is bigger than some small countries. And the responsibility of the councillors are enormous, as we see so many older people, because I spend time in some of the old people's homes. I help with some of the aged people in Barnet, and we see a tremendous increase of people getting older, and Councillor Moore referred to Alzheimer's. Now, there is a growth in dementia and Alzheimer's, and one of the elements, perhaps a big element, is people on their own. The doctors and the experts will tell you that Alzheimer's and dementia is linked to the decline of the neurons in the brain, the lack of the right diet, and excessive sugar brings on dementia and Alzheimer's. But the biggest factor is to try and have people not on their own being visited. I would love to see some scheme whereby a person adopts another person, adopts inverted commas, and makes contact with another person regularly. I have done that with different people, and it's been so important because the person living by himself or herself, it's a downward pattern so often. So although John Hart says that he is an old person, he belies that by his appearance.
I'll tell you how old.
Jim, did you have a comment you wanted to make?
Yes, whilst I agree that Barnet is, on the whole, a very lovely borough to live in, there are a group of people, I think approximately 1 or 2%, who would call it extremely vulnerable. Now, they are all ages, so I suppose the group hitting them would be they have some kind of disability that prevents them from usually living the normal life, whatever the age. And they are incapable of caring for themselves, and they are totally dependent on other people. Many of them do not have families anymore. Many of them have families who are very old. So you'll have a 70-year-old person looking after a 50-year-old person with learning difficulties. And these people, they can't be helped just by volunteers. I mean, are volunteers going to wipe their bottom every day? We're talking about really seriously ill and incapacitated people at the borough. I would expect as a resident of Barnet to take responsibility for, and that includes to care for them. And when you see things like happening with Your Choice Barnet, which I believe the staff had some kind of a haircut, if anyone wants to find out more about that, I think they should ask on the panel. They are destroying the services that these very, very vulnerable people need. And these people are people who have been assessed by social services as having critical and substantial needs. This is not a label that anyone in this room ever wants to have in their life, I can assure you. So what do the panel think they're going to do for these very vulnerable people to which they have a legal obligation of duty of care?
And moral.
And application. I'll just take one more comment before we ask the panel to comment. Teresa, you wanted to?
Yes, well, we've got some very comfortably placed people on the panel tonight telling us, that yes, Barnet is a very lovely place to live in, and it is for some people, but actually the fact that you say that without qualifying it speaks of great complacency, I think, because there are lots of people in this borough for whom life is not lovely. People who live in West Hendon, Strawberry Vale, Colindale, Dolly's Valley Estate, and they are the forgotten people of this borough, the invisible people of this borough, whom I'm afraid the Tory group tends to overlook sometimes. As we've heard from Cornelius and Councillor Tom Davey, they want to encourage only the well-off people to come and live in this borough. And some of the less well-off people in this borough, for example in West Hendon, are actually being cast out to live elsewhere. So I think there ought to be a little less complacency and a bit more compassion and understanding for those people who actually do not find this borough quite so lovely as you do.
Right, but we have some short comments on both those points, which are about people who are vulnerable in different ways, some through poverty and some through incapacity of other kinds, physical or mental. And are we being, I'm neutral, are you being complacent?
Well,
You can start. Alison.
Well, I mean, I did actually qualify my comments, and precisely for that reason, that actually there is, across the borough, there are many people who live comfortable lives. There are those who struggle to live good lives of any sort. And I think that's, you talked about politics, actually, that's one of the reasons, that's where my values come from. It's about the collective responsibility, and actually that we want to level up rather than level down. But actually my expectation and my aspiration is for everyone to collectively to have access to the things that we enjoy and want to do. Now that's a real challenge around finance, and you talk particularly about vulnerable residents of all ages and those with disability, and there is a real challenge around the funding for that. And actually, given the size of the challenge, that has to come from government funding in the first instance. What you do with that locally is about the principles that you live by and the way you honour your legal and statutory obligations. And that's about the moral obligation, about how you build, how you structure the care that you provide, all the services that you design, so they are inclusive and enabling where they can be. I think having said that, there are ways that we ought to be working to get the health service and social spending working together better, because that will actually enable many residents to have a better life. I mean, I'm really concerned about those younger adults, because over the last 20 years, medical intervention has ensured that children survive now who didn't 20, 30, 40 years ago. And we collectively have as a society, have an obligation to ensure that, to work to ensure that they can live both practically full lives, but actually also emotionally, and we'll come back to arts and other things later.
Down school then? What about the other schools?
Well, that's why we thought what we did, Janet. That's why we put it on the agenda, and that's why it's on the agenda on Monday night in the Children and Education Committee, because actually it does matter, absolutely.
It's not just that school.
And I just wonder if I may be a bit techy, pick up something that Aubrey mentioned about the issue of the emerging tie between Alzheimer's and diet. And one of the real challenges is there is an emerging tie between diabetes levels and Alzheimer's. And actually, Barnet actually does not have a good record of diabetes testing, and it's something we really should sort out, because just as diabetes has an implication subsequently for sight and sensory problems, there's also potentially an issue around emerging Alzheimer's. And I say that because my mother died last year with dementia, so it's something I've read a lot about over the last couple of years.
I nursed my husband for many
Yes,
years, so
yes.
I know of personal, very close experience, but the point is that not only is the borough short of money, but now all the charities like dementia, we've told to go to the Alzheimer's Society. The Alzheimer's Society is virtually closing down in Barnet because it has no funding. Disability Association Borough of Barnet is £30,000 deficit. And you go on through each single charity, they're all short of money, so there's nobody here to pop them up. And you mentioned what people did in Victorian times. Well, I can only think of the workout. Is that what you're suggesting?
Well,
I'm absolutely not.
Let me ask then for another question that ties into this on one of the levels, because we're talking a lot about finance. So Keith, do you have the question?
Thank you. Yes, my question is effectively a praising of some thoughts of Julian Silverman.